Hi everyone, I'm Sarah, and today I'm thrilled to welcome a very special guest, Russ Desai, CEO of LiveKit. LiveKit is a real-time voice and video platform that's quietly powering millions of calls every day for customers like OpenAI, Character, xAI, and more. Please give Russ a warm welcome. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Russ, I'd love to start by asking you, what makes a really good AI conversation?
Makes a good AI conversation. So I think ultimately what we're trying to do with voice AI and what we're building towards is an AI model that feels kind of indistinguishable from a human when you interact with it. I think that there's probably three parts or three key components to that. I think the first one is IQ. So how intelligent is that model? What's the quality of the tokens that are being output by that model? The second one, I think, is latency. For voice AI, you just need, I can respond to you in 200 milliseconds of latency. And so for voice AI, you need to get the latency down that low, right? The speed at which those tokens are coming out and being delivered to the user's device. And then I think the third is EQ, and we're just starting to explore this, right? Like, so when the AI interacts with you, is it using inflection, and what's its tone? Is it able to understand when you're done speaking, right? Or when to interrupt you? I think that that's kind of like this emotional aspect of a conversation with a human that's really important.
So for these three things that you've just mentioned, what do you think is the litmus test for whether or not it's human enough, and have voice agents reach that for latency, EQ, IQ?
I think like when you're going to production today, like what is human enough, it's really use case dependent. So I think for some use cases, like take what a company like Speak or Duolingo is building with kind of immersive language learning. I think for that kind of use case, there's a company that's using LiveKit to do a suicide prevention hotline. I think for those kinds of use cases, you really need a very empathetic AI. You need something that is going to kind of understand your emotional state, is able to communicate with you in a very human kind of fashion. So very high fidelity is required for those kinds of use cases. Then there are other use cases which maybe having something truly human-like isn't as important. So, for patient intake in a hospital, of course it depends on the kind of the mental state of the patient, but we've been working with companies who, for them, like what their users have found is, if this AI is saving me time and able to kind of have the flexibility of how I interact with it and get on my doctor's calendar, it doesn't necessarily need to respond in a specifically human-like way. It can even like sound a little robotic, and that's fine as long as it's getting what I'm saying right. When I say gastroenterology, does it understand how to route me to the right department? So I think it's use case dependent.
No, I love the suicide prevention example. And for use cases like that, is that something that's been enabled very recently, whereas like not that long ago, it wouldn't have been possible yet?
Yeah, I think what's made the kind of the use cases that are, I kind of put them in this bucket of, they kind of require very empathetic or human-like response quality from an AI model. I think the Omni models have made that possible. So OpenAI's real-time API, Gemini Live's multimodal API, these kinds of models that can like take in kind of voice data natively into the LLM and then output voice data directly, they are able to understand the expressive range of human kind of communication and also output similarly expressive responses. So I think that has really enabled things like language learning and suicide prevention and things like that. Advice nurse, like all kinds of use cases in that kind of category.
And at a grander view, how the market's clearly exploding. There's a lot of innovation.
Yeah.
And so how have you seen that also kind of play around or contribute and like follow with LiveKit's traction and you guys' growth?
Yeah, so the market, voice AI is definitely blowing up. There's a lot of people that are building these kinds of experiences now. large companies, startups as well. And even just a year and a half ago, this space didn't really exist. I think the idea of talking to a computer is not new. Where I grew up in Cupertino, De Anza College, almost 40 years ago, Steve Jobs unveiled the Macintosh, and it spoke to you. It said, "Hello, I'm Macintosh." And you know, this has been an idea that's been in the water for a long time. But I think now the technology is finally there to kind of make these sci-fi dreams a reality. LiveKit, I'm giving a talk in a few weeks about how I kind of consider us the accidental AI company, because we weren't really an AI company. We started during the pandemic as an open source project, and it was for connecting humans to other humans using WebRTC. And then maybe about a year and a half after, OpenAI found LiveKit and decided to build a voice interface to ChatGPT and started using it. And then when we started to work with them, all of a sudden we said, hey, well, this is an interesting use case. Instead of connecting humans to other humans, now we can connect humans to AI models or machines. And so I think ever since then, it's been this crazy ride where, you know, we've kind of been dragged, you know, we're grateful for it, but yeah, OpenAI kind of dragged us into the AI space, and now we're just fully focused on that, and the platform growth has been amazing.
Yeah, and of course, firstly, congrats on your partnership with OpenAI.
Thank you.
That's incredible. I guess something I'm wondering is, you mentioned like these healthcare use cases, you mentioned the suicide prevention. I'm sure no one can argue that it's bad that those are becoming automated, in the sense that, you know, there's greater availability, there's more support for people. But I mean, I think a lot of people do have this fear that, you know, as voice agents and everything becomes more powerful, we're building customer support agents, et cetera, there's like a fear, you know, that they're replacing jobs. So I guess, how do you think about that and what the future is going to look like as voice and speed and everything gets so good?
Yeah, I think that I think it's an interesting question, and I think that there's kind of like a phase timeline here. I think in the near term, even what we see today with like customer support use cases, just to use that example, is the AI models aren't perfect, right? They often have to actually escalate or do like transfers to a human in the loop, right? Or a supervisor or et cetera. And so I think that kind of like the replacement of jobs, at least in these early stages, I think is a little bit overblown, and I think there's more fear there than reality. In the medium term, I think what's going to happen is, I think that AI is going to do more of the tasks that humans don't necessarily want to do. I think what that does is it frees up a lot of time for us to do things that are innately human, like creative work. And so I think that we're going to see kind of in this second phase, we're going to see more people, in my opinion, explore creative work. Sometimes I'll talk to young kids, and I'll ask them, like, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they'll say, like, I want to be a YouTube influencer, or I want to be a Twitch streamer. And, you know, in a sense, that's creative work. And so I think we'll see more and more people exploring those kinds of things. And in the long term, it's tough to really know what it's going to look like. So I won't comment on that.
Okay. Well, I love what you brought up in the beginning too, because yes, we've talked about, you know, how to make AI feel more human. We're finally getting there, but you bring up a good point that it's still too early to really trust these models, especially in production. I think that's been a big thing, going from demo state to production, actually using voice in production. And you brought up a really good issue around steering and hallucination with these Omni models. We don't necessarily have as much control. So how is LiveKit thinking about that, and how are you guys maybe building for that?
Yeah. So one of the things that we did when OpenAI was building voice mode was we kind of like looked at what was the problem they were solving, right? They built a voice agent, and that voice agent is connected to both LiveKit's network and streaming audio back and forth. And it's also connected to GPT-4o on the back end and kind of sending audio data. And in the first version of voice mode, it was text data to the model. And what we saw was that a lot of people are probably going to want to build something similar to OpenAI. And so we started to work on this thing we call the agents framework, and it's kind of like a more generalized version of what OpenAI built with their voice agent that every developer can use to build similar types of things. And then the real-time model came out, and you can use that thing. You can use the real-time model with LiveKit's framework. You can use kind of like a STT, LLM, TTS pipeline as well. And I think for deploying these agents into production, our recommendation today and what we see is that the pipeline model is actually better to use today because, as you mentioned, like the Omni models can hallucinate. And one really interesting problem with that you kind of learn about when you kind of go deeper into this is you can make assertions about text, right? Text is just a string of characters, so you can write deterministic code that has mitigations for in the form of like guardrails that has mitigations around if the model hallucinates in some form. But that's much harder to do for audio. How do you write an assertion about, like a waveform, right, or an analog signal, and then like even extract that or extrapolate that out to video? It becomes even harder. And so I think that the Omni models will eventually kind of do all of it. Everything will be done within the foundational model eventually, but we're not there yet. And so I think that if you're going and building a voice AI application today, you're trying to deploy that at scale, get past the kind of demo to a real production use case, I think you should still build with the pipeline model. And I think that Cerebras actually makes that a lot easier or more viable to do.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you going to ask me why?
No, so I actually want to switch gears for a second. Not for a second, but we don't have too much time left, so I actually want to switch gears completely with something exciting that happened. So today, Cerebras announced that we serve Qwen 332B on our hardware. Thank you. And this is Cerebras' first reasoning model. And so speaking of reasoning models, I'd love to ask you, when we do reasoning with like text LLMs, it can output, with chain of thought or tree of thought, it can either output all the thinking tokens or, it can explore multiple different reasoning paths and pick the best answer. But what does that look like for voice? Like, you can't have like 5 voice agents all saying their train of, or like their train of thought and then pick the best one. Like, that doesn't really work. So how are you guys thinking about that? Because we're talking about better models. Reasoning seems like the next thing. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, reasoning is the next thing for sure, and it's super exciting. A similar kind of question came up. We did a meetup just here across the way, and a couple weeks ago, and this question came up, like, you have an Omni model, like the real-time API from OpenAI, and then you also have O3 that does reasoning, and how do you merge those two things together? This is a question from the audience, and this is something that OpenAI is researching as well, how to do that well, and we're thinking about it too. When you use a reasoning model and it's kind of showing you its chain of thought, it's pretty awkward in a voice AI app if you're just like, now I'm, reticulating spines and I'm like thinking about this and I'm doing some math. It's a pretty strange experience versus kind of like the text analog or the chat analog. And the way I've been thinking about it, I think there's a couple of things. Like, I try to draw parallels to how do humans do it, right? When we indicate that we're thinking about something, I mean, you asked me this question and I kind of like looked up and I said, huh, or I said, or and like I have these filler words that I insert that kind of indicate to you that I'm thinking. Another thing that we've thought about too is there are companies that are kind of working on avatar generation. Tavis, I think, is here, and there are other ones as well. And when you think about how do you communicate that you are thinking to another human being, visual representation actually makes a big difference as well, right? Like today we have these voice AIs, and they don't really have a visual representation. I mean, I guess some of them have like floating orbs and things, but I think in a future where you can generate video avatars, you can kind of show body language, right? Generated body language paired with things like ums and or let me think about that, or yeah, okay, like, and repeating back what your prompt, a portion of your prompt. So I think you're going to start to see people weave together more video generation and kind of like these dynamic kind of insertions of phrasing while the model is thinking. Something that I think Cerebras does amazingly well is that you can actually like run multiple reasoning loops in the same performance envelope as like just a single inference run on other providers. And so that thinking or that thought process can also occur a lot quicker, which I think is also like—
So it's less awkward.
It makes a problem a little less difficult to solve as well, because you're not just pausing for like 30 seconds or a minute necessarily before the response comes out.
Yeah, the AI avatar is not just like for like 30 seconds.
Yeah, as they tend to do today.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're almost out of time, so I'd love to ask one last question. But now that LiveKit has really, packaged together like speed, control, intelligence, and all of these components for voice AI, what are you really excited about for what's coming next, or what's going to soon become possible?
Yeah, so I think for us, in my opinion, I think the future of basically all computing is going to be voice-driven primarily. Doesn't mean you're going to stop touching your screens or anything like that, but I think as the computer does a lot more work, you don't necessarily have to have hands on keyboard all the time. And I think naturally you're going to start to interact with your voice, especially with physical AI when it's embodied in like a robot. You're not going to walk up to the back of it and start typing on a holographic keyboard. You're just going to talk to it. And so what LiveKit is really focused on now as a company, right? Not a few years ago when we started, but as a company now, it's really building like AWS for voice and computer vision based AI, like applications. We are building an end-to-end platform that maps to the developer's kind of product creation lifecycle. So we started off with a transport network for streaming audio and video. And then we built an agent framework, in part with our learnings from OpenAI, so that developers could build these agents, and those agents could connect to LiveKit's network. And then what we've been working on is kind of like a hosting platform. So you can deploy those agents, they can run for any amount of time, they can get access to tools, they can use browsers and operating systems. So that's like another piece, kind of like a compute-based service or a hosting service. And then I think the other thing that we're focused on is turn detection. I think like we've been training our own models internally for this. It's the hardest problem to solve in voice AI. How do you understand when a human is done speaking or when you can interrupt a human? That's another big problem. And then the last one is evals. Evals and observability. When you want to go to production, there's still a lot of reluctance especially from larger enterprises, to go and like replace workload that is already happening in a contact center, to use an example, with an AI, and you don't even know if that AI is going to go off the rails or hallucinate or do as good of a job. And then when you want to ship an update to that AI model, how do you know that there's not going to be a regression? You need to be able to build statistical confidence in this AI that you have trained, right, to do a particular workflow, that it's going to do that workflow the right way. It's still stochastic, but it's going to do the same thing roughly over and over and over and over. And so I think evaluation, observability, monitoring is another area that we're really starting to dig into.
Amazing. Well, thank you from the audience and myself so much for joining us today, Russ. I know we talked a little bit just now about LiveKit's future roadmap, but congrats again on all the amazing partnerships.
Thanks,
and
Sarah.
I'm sure we can say, very excited to see what LiveKit does next. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.